Welcome to Real Life Mentoring, where we explore real life issues to help you make an authentic difference in the world.
Hi, everyone. This is Chris with the Real Life Mentoring Podcast, and this is part 2 on a topic that's really interesting for some, uncomfortable for others, and we're talking about death. And the title is Death, Perspective, and Real Life. So I'm doing this episode with a friend and colleague, Michael Garrick. Michael had stirred this in me a few years ago when he gave me a book with the title, Let's Talk About Death Over Dinner by Michael Hebb. And so Michael and I, we spoke, if you've listened to it in the first episode, about some personal experiences we have had with death through important relationships. And we covered a few other aspects of it. We're going to finish the topic today. I say finish it. We're going to continue it. There's so much more to talk about. So I want to make a couple of statements. First of all, Michael, thank you for joining me again. But here's a couple of statements concerning death. We are all going to physically die at some point. That's just how it is. Am I crazy about that? No, I'm not. But it's a reality. And then it is uncomfortable for many people to talk about death. I understand some of that. And I want to get to the point, Michael, as you and I have talked, where talking about death is not uncomfortable. It's merely a conversation of something that's inevitable. So anyway, Michael, take it away. Where do you want to start from?
Yeah, so the title of the episode is Perspective in Real Life. So we can talk about kind of where we can get that from and how death provides that. There's a passage in Ecclesiastes in chapter 7 where it says that it's better to go to a house of mourning than to go to a house of feasting, since that is the end of all mankind, and the living should take it to heart. Grief is better than laughter, for when a face is sad, the heart may be glad. The heart of the wise is in a house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in a house of pleasure. And basically, I think what Solomon's trying to tell us is just that when we spend time around death or around the passing of someone we love, it helps us gain perspective, a proper perspective on life. If we go to a party, I don't know why, but the idea of like a Super Bowl party came to mind. We can get easily caught up in what's going on just in the moment and start losing a grasp of priorities. You know, what's most important is who's winning a football game, or who we're hanging out with, or telling the latest joke, or whatever. And those are good things. They're not evil or bad by in and of themselves. They don't really give us a lot of foundational truths to build our life around. Whereas being at a funeral, burying someone you love, seeing life pass away, it does something to you. It does something to your soul, to where it helps you reflect on things that matter. It helps you have conversations that actually matter, that have real meaning around them. I think it gives a proper weight to life. So it helps us feel the right things for a while at least. Hopefully that's what this podcast will do, this conversation will do, is kind of introduce the conversation. You and I can have a few moments just to ponder things that actually matter, that are truly important, and then help us have perspective to live accordingly, if that makes sense.
It does. You made me think of, I've actually led funerals before, a number of funerals. Some people I knew personally, and some people I have not. One of the things, if the families are open to it, one of the things I always suggest is this. I may have known this person or I may not have known this person, but let's really honor their lives by doing this. People who knew them well, stand up and share a memory or two you have of them. Or I even tell people, don't feel like you need to come to the front, and actually stand up where you are. And it's interesting, most people are really nervous about doing that. And I'm nervous about doing it. If I was at someone's service and I'm in the audience and they said, now, who wants to share a memory? Because again, there's emotion involved. We're going, I don't want to maybe weep in front of people. But this is what's interesting. Michael, shouldn't we be weeping at a funeral for someone? Instead of trying to hold it all together, that's actually crazy. So I actually tell people, if I'm leading a service, a funeral for someone, this is a time that's, if it's strange for some people, you're grieving, you find yourself maybe weeping or wanting to weep. That's okay. That's actually normal. Allow yourself to do that here. That's actually honoring the person. But having people stand up and share memories, I actually think that helps in the grieving process.
Yeah.
Like if I were to die
Yep.
first, Michael, and you're at my funeral, let's just get real here. And someone said, whoever's leading, all right, anybody want to share something about Chris? And let's say you're grieving. Hopefully you'd grieve my passing. And you'd stand up and say, well, these are some memories I have of Chris, or this is what I know about him. Well, it's not about me anymore. Actually, I don't need that, Michael. I'm gone. But it would actually help you in some ways as the person grieving.
And I think you already know what story I would tell.
I know a funny one you would tell. You know what? Wait, no, that's an excellent point. You would share a goofy story of me many years ago, and what that would do, and people, well, that's not very respectful. No, it actually is. Laughter actually helps people grieve as well.
No, I was just saying it's part of life. It's part of your and I's shared experience,
It
our
is, and
relationship.
it
So
does something. Here's an example. When my dad died, so my siblings and I were there in the audience, a small church. I say that because I mean we're packed in there. And of course, we're
mhm.
grieving, but this little minister gets up there who didn't know my dad personally. And he's talking about my dad and he's reading the obituary. Okay. And
Yeah.
my dad was a musician, a really gifted professional musician at some point in my life
Mhm.
early on. Well, the little pastor said, and again, my dad, he had a lot of issues. And I don't say that with disrespect. It's just a fact. My dad would go play music with his band on the weekends, and he may or may not show back up for a number of days. Okay,
Right.
that was typical with my dad. So the pastor, this who did not know my dad well at all, he's reading the obituary and he says, you know, this man, he did this, this, and this, and he was a magician. He meant to say musician, but he said magician, and we started laughing as siblings, sitting there. And I leaned over to one of my sisters and I said, "Well, Dad did have a pretty good disappearing act. You never knew when he was going to show back up." And
Yeah.
that sounds disrespectful for some, but those kind of things help us grieve, Michael.
Yeah. I can
And
remember. I remember after my dad's funeral, going back to the house and telling stories, and people are crying, but people are also laughing a lot. So I think remembering whoever it is, you remember the whole person, remember everything about them, and that does, like you said, that gives honor to them, that honors their life, honors who they were. Death doesn't, going back to the meaning and purpose. I don't think death robs any of that. Doesn't rob any of the joy or any of the humor from those moments. It clouds it for a while, you know, because you're feeling the pain. But in some ways, when after that goes away, it almost gives it more value, it gives it more dignity, it gives it more importance because you realize how short life is. You realize how meaningful those relationships are, and so those moments carry more weight. They have more meaning because you can look back on and you can remember exactly where that person was at that time or what was happening, and how everybody responded.
I want to talk about age for a moment. It's interesting. You know, I don't want to see a young person, a child, a baby, a child, a teenager die. It seems wrong humanly.
Hmm.
But I do know I trust God, and God, as you're listening, I want you to understand I'm not a hypocrite here. I have three grown daughters. I have a grandson who's like 5 months old at this point. I don't want to lose my family.
Hmm.
But I know that God is still good, even when young people die. And we say
Hmm.
they died before their time. I can't explain that. But age is interesting. So if let's say a 10-year-old boy or girl died, that is tragic. It is.
Hmm.
And their life was short. But I think if you talk to a 90-year-old person, well, I had an aunt who was like a mother to me. She just died about 6 weeks ago. A lot of grieving I went through and still going through, but I have such peace about it. But she was 92 when she died. If you were to ask her, she might say, "Man, my life has been so short." Do you understand?
Mm. Yep. Yeah.
You go, what are you 92 years old? You should be ready to die. Maybe so. She was, but maybe so or maybe not. But the point is, it doesn't matter that on the age concerning that person. Life can still seem really short, even for a 90-year-old.
Yeah.
I I have a faith in Jesus, and it's so real, and it's not religion, Michael, and you know this. It's a relationship that I have, and I can tell you because of this. There's no other reason I have it other than this. when I've experienced death with people that I'm close to, it is that relationship with Jesus that I know this real peace and comfort takes over, and it walks
Hmm.
me through it again and again. It doesn't mean I don't grieve. It means he walks me through it. And it's really amazing. As I said, I think in the first episode, I was with my mother when she died. I saw her take her last breath. And the I was sad, but the peace and comfort that came over me instantly, it doesn't make sense humanly to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember thinking to myself, I should be screaming right now. I should be beside myself. I just saw my mother die, but I wasn't, Michael. That
Yeah.
is the peace and comfort of God that cannot be explained humanly.
Right. Well, that's what we're promised, right? Is a peace that surpasses understanding. And there's, we mentioned there being a lot of unknown and a lot of gaps in knowledge and all that when it comes to death. And so I think faith fills those gaps, not necessarily with the answers, but with just the truth that, like you alluded to, that God's still in control and that he knows what's happening. And even when we feel like things are not going according to plan, we can still rest. We can still know that it's okay.
Well, you sent me some notes in preparation for these episodes on death, and I want you to
Hmm.
talk about. You made a statement, and I'm going to get to that in just a moment. But I want to stop for a moment and say, yes, you're listening to a podcast that's based on mentoring, and so some of you may be wondering, okay, why are you talking about death on a mentoring podcast? Well, because when we mentor people, we take the holistic approach. This is what we do with Fahrenheit Real Life Mentoring. We are spiritual, physical, mental, emotional, relational, and professional or educational, depending where you are in life. Death is a part of it. And so, what a privilege we actually have if you're mentoring someone that you can sit down with them in a trusted relationship and help them walk through in preparation, maybe for their own death and thinking about things differently. If they've lost someone recently or in the past, you could help them walk through some grief. It's a real gift, Michael, that God has given me. It's not, I don't wake up going, I hope I get to walk with someone through grief today because of a death they've experienced. But I can tell you, it really is a privilege that we're given to be able to do that. So I want you to address, you wrote here, God chose to make death very personal, even for himself. And then we're going to talk about some benefits of talking about
Hmm.
death after that. So take it away.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the things that separates faith in Jesus from other religious backgrounds, right? Is that it's like God not only associates with death, but actually chose to die. And Jesus, when we read through the Gospels, when we read through the story of his life, and he's talking to his followers, he's not hiding that from them. He's being very open about the fact that he came for a purpose, and that the fulfillment of that is going to lead him to death. And so it wasn't always obvious. I think sometimes when he was communicating, it was a little bit cryptic or a little bit not intended for everyone to understand fully until after the time had come for him to die and rise again. But it wasn't anything that he was afraid to talk about. It wasn't anything that he skirted around, and it was just part of the natural course of his life. And I think he did that, I mean, for a lot of reasons, but specifically to help the disciples with their grief afterwards, that they could have hope, knowing that what happened wasn't unintended or unplanned. It wasn't something that caught him by surprise, but it was, again, part of the plan, so that they could continue going on living and doing what he called them to do without fear of having to think of a new strategy. He'd already thought of it all. He'd already done it. So with us, I think there's, I don't want to say you and I are martyrs and we need to talk about our death to everybody we come across, but living with realization that our life is going to have a beginning, it's going to have a middle, it's going to have an end, should encourage us to make good use of our time while we're here. It should keep us focused. It should keep us from getting too distracted with just stuff that happens that is really of little consequence. So it kind of does, we talked about earlier, is it gives you a little bit of perspective, a bit of focus on what really matters.
I have a
So yeah,
question for you
that's
in talking about that.
yeah, yeah.
Have you ever sat down and put together an order of service, things you want said and done at your funeral?
I have it written down somewhere. I'm not sure where it is. So it wouldn't be much use of for anybody right now. So I need to probably go back and redo it. And I think that's something that's probably needs to be updated too, because I did it several years ago.
And you're much younger than I am. That's impressive. I say it's impressive. I've not done that. I think about it different times, and
Hmm.
I'm being very human here. You know why I haven't done it? I think. Well, if I put it on paper, put it on the laptop, it's real then.
Yeah.
Isn't that's
Yeah.
interesting? And I know I'm going to die anyway. Even if I don't put the order of service together, I'm still going to die, and God knows when. But there's
Yeah.
something, and I'm getting over this. In fact, you can challenge me later, Chris. Have you gotten that done yet? And I mean that. Put it on
Hmm.
paper, things that you want said and done, how you want it to go. It would be a gift for my wife and my daughters to already have
Hmm.
that.
Yeah.
It's like
No, for sure.
I grew up in a family of great dysfunction. That's not being critical. It's just a fact of life. But we never talked about that we were dysfunctional. We never talked about
Hmm.
problems. It didn't mean we didn't have problems. They were there. And it actually caused
Yeah.
more problems because we didn't talk about the problems.
Hmm.
Does it make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. No, for sure. For sure.
If we're not careful, we may do the same thing with death. I'm not going to talk about it, not going to address it, not going to
Hmm.
prepare because then it's real. It's real anyway, guys.
Yeah.
It's real anyway.
Yeah.
Here's a side, maybe a side question for you. When celebrities die, do you think about them? On the news, it'll say, so and so died today. Do you give it any thought?
Typically, no. I mean, it would have to be something that was a real shock out of it, like unexpected, somebody
Okay.
young. Not that it should make a real big difference. None of them is really changing my life in any way. When it comes out of the blue, then yeah,
Okay.
I it kind of tweaks me a little bit. But to turn your phrase, tweaks my brain.
Tweaks my
But
brain. Do I say that a few times?
it's
Okay.
okay.
Well, it
Um,
does. I would say
um,
I think a
yeah.
lot about it when a celebrity dies. It may be someone that I didn't even follow. And I'm not a big celebrity follower. I mean, people are people, but I tend to think about them a lot. And I tend to think or wonder, did they have a relationship with Jesus?
Hmm.
What was their life like? What's their family going through? Because and I use the topic of celebrities because sometimes for people, celebrities seem untouchable. They're not like
Hmm.
the rest of us in some ways. But the fact is, celebrity is something that we give people through marketing and deliberate
Yeah.
planning. You know what I'm saying? They're just
Hmm.
people. So I tend to think about that. Are there any people in your life or types of people that you tend to not think about them dying? Or maybe in the past you did?
Not really. There's not a lot of people that I do think about dying, to be honest. I think if I was to avoid thinking about it, it would probably be my own children. Based on one, I don't want to think about it
True.
because if it
Nor
happens
do
while I'm
I.
alive, then that means that I've outlived my kids, which is just weird. It just seems wrong to me.
It
Um,
does.
so yeah, so those are the only ones that I would think I don't really think about it a whole lot. But I don't spend a lot of time thinking about most people aside from myself.
I know that this is not reality, but this is where my brain has worked in the past on this. There are certain people who seem so strong and together, like you
Mm,
can always count on them, and you go, "Wow, I know they're going to die," but my brain in the past is that they're probably not going to die. They're so strong, they take care of people, they have it together, and it's
mm,
just, and I know that's silly, but we're all going to die. It doesn't matter how strong you are, how smart. It doesn't matter if you're the president of the United States or some high figure in some other country. It doesn't
yeah,
matter if you're the wealthiest or the most guarded person because of your status.
yeah,
We're all going to die, and yeah, I just think that way.
hmm,
Let's talk about some benefits of talking about death. Now, I think I put maybe five on this list. And of
hmm.
course, there are many others. There are just some that came to my mind. And if you have some others or any comments you want to make on this. So, benefits of talking about death. That sounds like a funny statement for some. There are benefits to me talking about death. Well, you mentioned it earlier. It helps us with our life focus. What's really
Hmm.
important?
Yeah.
I've gotten bogged down, Michael, because I'm frustrated about something or someone did something that disappointed me or frustrated me, and I've allowed it at times to dictate my whole day.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
a foolish thing for me to do. So I'm thankful that I recognize it now and I'm able to say, okay, wait a minute. Yes, that's irritating or frustrating or it causes me stress, but I can let that rob my whole day. Again, talking about death, I'm not promised tomorrow. That's not being morbid. It's just a reality.
Right.
Another benefit of talking about death, I think, it helps us to live our lives with more purpose.
Yeah. Have you seen? There's a you can buy a calendar. And I've been tempted to buy it on a couple of occasions. Maybe I need to. And I forget how many weeks it is, but it's a calendar, and you cross off a week every week that you're alive. The intention is the calendar is your lifespan, and so it's a 85 or 90-year calendar, and you go up once a week and you just make a mark off, and so you can watch your life on the calendar slowly
Wow.
either fill up or pass away, however you want to term it,
I would think
But in
that
my
would be
head,
I don't think that would be a high seller. Maybe it is.
I think it is, because I think if you were to think about when you have a big project to do,
Yes.
compare when you have a deadline and when you do not have a deadline.
No pun intended.
Right.
Deadline.
Yeah,
Okay.
I didn't even think about that. When you have a deadline, it just forces you to work. It forces you to get stuff done. It forces you
Okay.
to check things off and make progress. Whereas if you don't, you can just drag your feet, take your time, get distracted. You can be busy without being productive. And
Oh,
I know
okay.
you
Good
know what
point.
that means.
I've done that.
And I think that's a temptation, all of us, is we can get distracted and start doing stuff and feel like our days are full, but we're not really getting anything done. Whereas if you have a deadline, then you have to actually be accountable to getting stuff done. So maybe talking about death is almost like giving yourself a deadline.
No, I actually love
Or an
that.
expiration date, whatever phrase you want to use, expiration date, deadline. Um,
Oh, but Michael, that makes sense. Thank you for saying that because I go, okay, I can look at death and go, how discouraging, how depressing, how morbid. It doesn't have to be. But I go, wait a minute,
mhm.
I am going to die. But God has promised me eternal life through his son Jesus. And I have that. But I have opportunity to live on this earth right now. God, what do you want me to
Yeah.
do with this?
Yeah.
And
What
I
do you want to
get
leave
to step
behind?
into eternity at some point.
Right. Yeah. What do you want to leave behind? What do you want to put out? That's the value while you're here. What do you want to create and offer to the people around you? I think all those are good questions.
There's so much more we could talk about. Let me throw out a couple more, two or three more
Yeah.
benefits I think of talking about death. It helps us not to take our lives and our relationships for granted.
Hmm.
When I was started to mentoring that young cousin of mine a few months ago, and we were together on a Friday for a few hours, I get a phone call the following Wednesday that he'd been killed. I was like,
Hmm.
"What?" And I
Yeah.
didn't take him for granted, but I did not think about he's going to die at the age of 19.
Yeah.
It shook me. So not taking our lives and our relationships for granted. Talk our benefits of talking about death. It helps us to prepare for our death, Michael.
Yeah. I would say it helps us and it helps the people we love. Like you
It
mentioned, it helps the people we leave behind.
it actually
Um,
does.
I think in that book, Let's Talk About Death Over Dinner, he mentioned, he has some more statistics, but basically talking about how much people spend on funerals, how much stress it causes financially and emotionally. And if things are planned out beforehand, it really frees people up to make choices that are not going to put them in bankruptcy or
That
be
that's a
a burden on them, because you realize it's not that important.
that's a very tangible, important mindset in helping people prepare just for financial and emotional reasons as well.
Um,
And for me, this is the most important. One of the benefits of talking about death, and I shouldn't even call it one of the benefits, but it actually helps us to engage God on a deeper personal level. I
mhm.
hope it does. It does for me. When I think about my own death, it's going to happen. Then God, who is my creator, may it cause me to seek him out even more, Michael. And I think about
Yeah.
death because Michael, you can't help me concerning my death. I
Yeah.
can't help you. The best medical doctors on the planet cannot keep us from dying at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And so they can't help us. But I tell you what, as I think about my death, I want to engage God even more because he holds my life in his hands. I know that.
It definitely forces our conversation to be beyond the superficial.
I tell people, and it's not even talking about the topic of death, if you want to talk about the weather, I'm not your guy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not.
Yeah.
We can talk about the weather, meaning surface conversations are everywhere. I want to spend my time more effectively. And yet I love having a fun time and talking about trivia and things like that, but I don't want that to be the foundation of my life. Okay, any closing remarks or questions or thoughts you have?
I know the first episode we talked more about grief. There's a line from a song that I've been listening to going around in my head that I like a lot, and it's by a guy named Stephen Wilson Jr.
Stephen Wilson Jr. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the line is, "Grief is only love that has no place to go."
Well said.
And as I find myself listening to it, and I think about my dad quite a bit when I listen to it, and I realize that there's a lot of truth in that. That grief is a lot of times it's love that we have for people that are not here anymore, and we have no way to express it or to show it or to deliver it to that person. And I think that's what causes it to hurt. So yeah, so that was kind of just the one thing that was kind of going around in my head as we were talking about this.
Well said. Are you good about telling your family that you love them?
My immediate family, yeah, I feel like I am.
Wife and children, okay. I say that because, well, we obviously want to mean it, but we're not promised, and that's not being morbid. We're not promised another time to say that. And I thought about that when you said that's about that statement in that song. Grief is just love that has no place to go. Is that what it said?
Yeah.
Right now, people in my life and your life that are living, we have an opportunity to express that to them, and vice versa.
Yeah, for sure.
I want to be more deliberate about that. I get caught up in, Michael, sometimes in things that really don't matter. And I'll look back over a day and go, I got bent out of shape or frustrated with that. And that didn't matter, but it may have damaged that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it just, so another benefit of talking about death, it helps put things in priority for me.
Yeah.
Like, Chris, chill out in the big, chill out. In the big scheme of life, that will not matter. It feels like it does right now, but it won't.
Yeah. No, I think that helps all of us. I think we all have a tendency to do that. So
again, if you're mentoring someone or you're a mentee and someone's mentoring you, putting this topic on the table, let's talk about death. It may be uncomfortable in the beginning, but I promise you, well, I can't promise. I believe it will encourage you. And that sounds strange, I know. Talking about your death and the death of others will actually encourage you, because when you've stepped into the unknown, it is uncomfortable. The more we talk about something, the more relaxed we get about it, and because we understand it better. Here's a couple of questions, and with it's redundant actually. What happens if we don't talk about death, Michael? We still die.
You're still going to die.
Still going to die.
Still die.
What happens if we do talk about death?
Yeah, you're still going to die.
Still going to die, but you'll
be ready for it.
Right. We could help our relationships by doing this. It could help us mentally, emotionally, and spiritually by doing this. Yeah, I just want to encourage you guys. As a trusted mentor, you can have the privilege, as a father, as a mother, as a daughter or son, as a friend, you could have a real privilege of initiating conversations about death with people that you care about. Michael, any other closing thoughts?
That's all I have. I appreciate the time, the conversation. It's good.
Well, it's interesting. I've been thinking about this for a while, and then you and I began to talk, and to be able to do this with another man is helpful for me, because as men, our minds think similarly, and so this is incredibly healthy, I think. So I want to thank you guys for listening to the Real Life Mentoring Podcast. If you would subscribe and like, we'd appreciate that. If you want to make a donation toward the production of this podcast, you can go to the website, FahrenheitRealLifeMentoring.org. So once again, thank you guys for listening.